swift yet gracefully fluid, agile and dexterous yet steadfast and strong, and armed with the most virulent cocktail of toxins. Giant centipedes are a force to be reckoned with in the arthropod world and well beyond. If you're an insect or a spider, or just about any other small or not-so-small critter milling its way about the undergrowth, these multi-legged hunters would be among the last things you'd ever want to encounter. Indeed, there's a respectable chance one could very well be the last thing you'd ever encounter. And nor are there many places where the inhabitants of the undergrowth can live without fear of being tracked down and devoured by one of these ruthless hunters. For giant centipedes can be found across the globe, and in this video we'll be ranking each of the world's continents by their biggest centipede species. Starting with Antarctica in 7th place. No centipedes here, that's easy. Next, in Europe at 6th place we have Scolopendra cingulata. Scolopendra cingulata is best known as the Mediterranean banded centipede, and has a fairly broad range encompassing much of southern Europe, as well as the northernmost portions of Africa and parts of the Middle East. Though Scolopendra cingulata is relatively modest in size for a giant centipede, it is nevertheless capable of reaching impressive dimensions, with excessively large individuals boasting body lengths in excess of 17 centimeters, and even the more typical size range of around 10 to 15 centimeters is still quite respectable. Like many scolopendrid centipedes, especially widespread species, Scolopendra cingulata varies quite considerably across its range, in terms of both coloration and patterning, and while many variants possess the species' namesake banded markings, some are more uniform. The diversity in appearance exhibited by this species has been the subject of a number of studies investigating the genetic and evolutionary basis of this variability. One publication focused on the population inhabiting Sicily and its immediate surroundings. Here it was found that the local Scolopendra cingulata formed 3 genetically and visually distinct clades. Very similar results were found in another study focused on Scolopendra cingulata in Greece. Once again, genetic analysis revealed the presence of 3 distinct subgroups within the local population. There also seems to be variability in more than just coloration. Across its range, other aspects of the centipede's anatomy, including the number of segments on the antennae and the amount of spines on the terminal legs, differ as well, with populations from the more easterly reaches of the centipede's distribution possessing both a greater quantity of antennal segments and a more extensive covering of spines on the terminal legs. As far as venom goes, Scolopendra cingulata isn't all that noteworthy. Like any decent-sized centipede, it's certainly capable of inflicting a memorable amount of discomfort by means of its venomous forcipules, but in relation to the absolutely brutal effects that envenomations from centipedes elsewhere in the world can bring about, a pinch from Scolopendra cingulata is comparatively inconsequential, typically causing a moderate degree of local pain and swelling. Despite its modesty on the centipede world stage, Scolopendra cingulata has time and again proven itself to be a force truly fearsome, readily subduing other predatory arthropods like scorpions, and in a rather gruesome show of indomitable resolve, partially chewing its way out of a venomous adder's body after being swallowed by the snake, though unfortunately perishing before it could free itself completely. And the fact that the smallest and most inoffensive centipede on this list has such impressive feats to its name should say a lot about the capabilities of these formidable predators. At 5th place, we come to Africa. Africa is home to a variety of centipedes, but when it comes to deciding on the biggest, well, it's a pretty easy choice. Ethmostigmus trigonopodus, heavily built and over 20 centimeters long, is without contest the largest centipede on the continent. It's also quite an easy species to recognize, and for reasons beyond its size alone. While Ethmostigmus species can, at a glance, be readily confused with other large centipedes like Scolopendra, distinguishing them from lookalikes becomes simple upon closer examination. The bodies of all centipedes are lined with small openings called spiracles, through which they breathe, and in Ethmostigmus, in what is regarded as a key defining feature, the foremost pair is noticeably larger than the rest, and once you've narrowed the identity down to the genus Ethmostigmus, no further deduction is needed provided you know the location, for Ethmostigmus trigonopodus is the only Ethmostigmus species present in Africa. Ethmostigmus trigonopodus is not only quite a big centipede, it is allegedly a fast grower. Research on these centipedes in Nigeria found evidence that they more than doubled in length within the space of 5 months, and reached sexual maturity after just 1 year, continuing to grow throughout the dry season despite a lack of visible activity, indicating that they could find ample access to food even deep underground. However, given the variation that occurs within the same species, and the different environments it inhabits across its range, this rapid growth rate and likely short lifespan may not uniformly apply to all populations of Ethmostigmus trigonopodus. The venom and temperament of Ethmostigmus trigonopodus appears to be something of a mixed bag. Some have described envenomations from this species as being surprisingly mild for a centipede of its size. Others report more intense symptoms. Likewise, many describe the temperament of Ethmostigmus trigonopodus as being quite mellow, though there are anecdotes of some individuals being much less amiable. Next up, we have a continent that for some of you might be surprisingly low on this list. In 4th place, we have Australia. For a land that's famed more than any other for big, scary, creepy crawlies, Australia somewhat routinely disappoints in that regard. Yet even here, a country where it can feel like just about every animal is overhyped and practically nothing lives up to its reputation, the giant centipedes can be a sight to behold. And on continental Australia, there is no question at all as to what the biggest centipede is: Ethmostigmus rubripes. Official sources are hardly consistent when describing this centipede's size. The animal's scientific description gives it a very modest upper limit of 13.5 centimeters. Other sources are a bit more generous, commonly stating the species reaches lengths of around 16 centimeters. But I can say with certainty that these are all considerable underestimates of the sizes that Ethmostigmus rubripes can attain, and the reason I know that is this. So in stark contrast to Australia's spiders, whose sizes are all too often the subject of much embellishment, this country's centipedes are, if anything, even bigger than what many may suspect. But at least in my opinion, it's not the size of Ethmostigmus rubripes that causes it to stand out from its relatives both in this country and abroad. It's the centipede's unrivaled versatility. In what can only be bad news for every other creepy crawly on the continent, Ethmostigmus rubripes has a domain that spans almost the entirety of Australia, from the parched deserts of the Red Centre to the wet tropics up north and nearly everywhere in between. And Ethmostigmus rubripes is hardly monotonous across its range, exhibiting an immense degree of variation in colour as well as size and body proportion. Some are stout and compact, with robust bodies and rather short legs. Others have a leaner build, with a thinner body and much longer legs. And while this variation often corresponds with distribution, there are some areas where multiple forms, each differing in coloration, size, and overall build, can be found coexisting. As a predator, Ethmostigmus rubripes is far from fussy. Not only will these huge centipedes happily gorge themselves on anything they're capable of overpowering, they are also not beholden to a single mode of hunting. Sometimes they favour ambush tactics, sitting motionless on tree trunks or at the entrance of a burrow, waiting to launch themselves at passing prey with an explosive burst of speed and power. Other times, they are less content with waiting for food to come to them, and will actively scour the undergrowth, earnestly probing every nook and cranny for whatever small creatures may be seeking shelter within. Unlike its African relative, Ethmostigmus rubripes is, at least from my experience, a slow-growing, long-lived species, though different locales predictably vary in this regard. The most extreme example I have personally encountered is a juvenile individual hailing from around Muttaburra in central Queensland. I've owned this centipede for nearly 3 years at this point, and in all that time it's only grown by a couple of centimeters. And since growth rate in centipedes tends to progressively slow down over the course of their lives, I'm almost wondering how adults even exist at all.
Ethmostigmus rubripes might be far and away the biggest centipede on mainland Australia, but a potential rival emerges on the horizon if one zooms out a little further. The Norfolk Islands, though geographically closer to New Zealand, are considered part of Australian territory, and they are home to another large centipede, Cormocephalus coini. A whole suite of Cormocephalus species are present on the Australian mainland, but none approach the size of this island-dwelling giant, which has been recorded at up to 23 centimeters long. And if the size of Cormocephalus coini isn't impressive enough, its position in the local food chain most certainly is. For nearly 300 million years after the end of the Carboniferous period, here in the modern day is an arthropod that stands as the top predator of its habitat, hunting almost anything that shares its island realm, from insects and lizards to the chicks of nesting birds. Now we move up into third place, to Asia. In the big centipedes department, Asia is a considerable step up from all of the previous continents, playing host to a broad array of scolopendrid centipedes, many of which are not only very large, but often highly venomous to boot. But even in Asia, where the competition for the title of biggest centipede is tougher than anywhere I've talked about so far, one or maybe two species stand out beyond the rest.
The first is one of the most familiar and notorious of all giant centipedes, Scolopendra dihani. This is a species that attains body lengths of around 20 centimeters with some degree of regularity, but if that's not impressive enough, some individuals can get much bigger, with the largest recorded specimen that I'm aware of measuring an imposing 32 centimeters long. Widespread and common across much of Southeast Asia, Scolopendra dihani is regularly encountered in its native land, but its familiarity transcends the bounds of its wild range. For rather questionably, this species also happens to be one of the most commonly sold centipedes in the exotic pet trade, and I'm very much of the mind that the ready availability of Scolopendra dihani is to a large degree responsible for the unsavory reputation centipedes have among invertebrate keepers. Like many giant centipedes, Scolopendra dihani is a generalist predator, and is far from picky about not only what it hunts, but how it hunts. Though they are for the most part nocturnal, these centipedes have also been observed actively foraging in broad daylight as well. And though the ground may be the centipede's typical hunting arena, Scolopendra dihani has also been observed climbing on tree trunks too, which shouldn't come as a surprise given their competence at climbing.
Scolopendra dihani is the largest described centipede in Asia, but a strong competitor for the title of the continent's biggest centipede emerges if one turns their gaze onto the befuddling world of potentially undescribed centipedes. Asia is home to many centipedes that have yet to be given a proper name and scientific description, and among centipede enthusiasts, yes, there's such a thing, only go by informal nicknames. One of these is a centipede that has been dubbed garnet or whitebeard. While some have suspected that this is just another colour variant of Scolopendra dihani, it does appear to exhibit subtle but noteworthy differences in anatomy that would indicate it's a separate, possibly unnamed species. Among the most pertinent is the presence of spines on the underside of the terminal legs, which are noted to be absent in Scolopendra dihani. This enormous Scolopendra species hails from Vietnam, and just like Scolopendra dihani, surpasses 20 centimeters with some frequency and may exceed 30 centimeters. But the paucity of available information about this centipede means that, aside from its size, there's little else that can be said about it. Either way, it's certainly worth the mention. Now for second place. From North America, we have Scolopendra alternans. On the North American mainland, Scolopendra alternans aren't all that impressive. They're big, sure, but hardly a standout compared to just about all of this video's previous entrants. But when you look at certain island populations, then it quickly becomes apparent just how massive these centipedes can be.
Some of the most impressive examples can be found in the Caribbean, namely on the islands of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. Scolopendra alternans, as is the norm for these arthropods, comes in a variety of colour patterns. A banded variant is perhaps the most typical across much of the Caribbean, and can attain lengths of over 20 centimetres. But of all the Scolopendra alternans variants, none are larger than the aptly nicknamed Hispaniola red giant. Measuring in at over 30 centimetres long, and looking all the more imposing for it thanks to its hefty build, the Hispaniola red giant is a sight to behold indeed, and something that even other heavyweights of the arthropod world like this tarantula would do well to be wary of.
There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of published research concerning this species, with one of the few noteworthy publications being a somewhat controversial article from 2022. This study espoused the idea that the Cuban and Floridian populations of Scolopendra alternans were distinct enough to each be regarded as separate species, named Scolopendra cubensis and Scolopendra longipes respectively. This proposition, however, has yet to be broadly accepted, and as per Kilobase, a global catalogue of centipede species, neither Scolopendra cubensis nor Scolopendra longipes are recognised as valid names unto themselves, instead remaining mere synonyms of Scolopendra alternans. Finally, we come to the top spot. From South America is Scolopendra gigantea.
All giant centipedes are formidable predators, but in pure brute strength and sheer ferocity, there are few that could hold a candle to Scolopendra gigantea. Capable of reaching lengths well in excess of 30 centimetres, and with a robust, girthy body packed full of muscle, this multi-legged juggernaut is not only a giant among centipedes today. As far as we know, Scolopendra gigantea is the biggest centipede to have ever lived. And before anyone brings up Arthropleura, that was not a centipede.
The size of Scolopendra gigantea puts a lot of animals on the menu, but there's one prey item in particular that this centipede is especially well known for hunting: bats. Cave-dwelling populations of Scolopendra gigantea have been recorded preying on bats on a somewhat frequent basis, either by attacking them while they roost, or reaching down from cave ceilings and seizing them mid-flight. And observations of these centipedes spending several hours waiting on cave ceilings, as well as their apparent tendency to ignore smaller prey like insects while journeying to their hunting posts, give reason to suspect that Scolopendra gigantea are not simple opportunists relying on pure chance to bring them to their prey, but are instead purposeful hunters.
Scolopendra gigantea is most often known as the Amazon giant centipede, but this name is veering on being at least partially a misnomer. For while the centipede's range does slightly dip into the northernmost portion of the Amazon basin, the vast majority of its distribution lies outside this namesake region. In addition to the mainland, Scolopendra gigantea also inhabits a number of nearby islands, including Trinidad and Aruba.
There are reports of these centipedes occurring further north as well, in places like Puerto Rico, but these are dubious and very likely the result of misidentification. And I can say from my own regrettable experience in various bug identification groups online, that people are all too eager to identify any remotely big centipede as Scolopendra gigantea, without paying any heed to whether the location or the anatomy of the centipede itself is a match.
Across its range, its actual range of course, Scolopendra gigantea, like so many of its kindred, varies in coloration, but not to nearly the same extent as some of the centipedes we've talked about earlier. Broadly speaking, there are just two main variations of this species, a black form with banded legs, and a brownish version with pale stripes across its body and cream or yellowish legs, though further, more subtle variation exists within both of these major types.
And with Scolopendra gigantea, in many ways the ultimate centipede, this video comes to a fitting close. But of course, it's not just the giants that deserve recognition. And if you're interested in more centipede content, then head over to this video about a garden variety centipede that, in spite of its familiarity, had long befuddled me. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.